So my name is Elizabeth Chesak, and I serve as the current president of Women's Declaration International USA. I also founded the WDI USA Desisted and Detransitioned Women's Caucus last year, which is what I'm here to speak about today. When I talk about the caucus, I do about how I got here and how I ended up as a Generation Z TERF, just to give some context, and also because I think there are so many commonalities among desisted and detransitioned women. So I was a very bookish child, and I remember reading about the women's movement when I was probably 8 or 9. Very basic stuff written on a children's level about the American suffragists like Susan B. Anthony. And it definitely planted the seeds of feminism for me. So, like I said, it was pretty basic stuff. But I did have an understanding from a very early age that women had not always had the rights that so many take for granted today. Our foremothers fought very hard so that we could wear pants, go to school, hold jobs, own property, etc. So I had that foundation and I had that understanding that, we were treated differently because we were women, and it wasn't based on a feeling in our heads. So in 2012, when I was 16, I started spending way too much time online, and I got involved in a Harry Potter role-playing game, of all things, and many of the other participants were other teenage girls who identified as quote-unquote trans or non-binary. And I still remember sitting there thinking maybe I wasn't a lesbian after all. Maybe I was really a heterosexual man born in the wrong body, and things just kind of spiraled from there. So I spent the years from 2012 to 2019 feeling increasingly confused and unsure of who I was. So that was about age 16 to 22. And I sank into a really deep depression because I thought I would never figure this out. I thought quote unquote transition was inevitable. And I spent hours researching procedures that I thought I wanted and obsessing about different identity labels. It was just a huge waste of time. But ultimately, I never medicalized, and I'm very grateful for that today. I've always been very inquisitive and very determined. Some people might say stubborn, and I think that saved me. I'm always asking why, I always want to know more, and there were so many things about trans ideology that just didn't add up. I had so many doubts, but I thought I was a bigot for thinking those things. So, for instance, when TRAs say trans women are women, oops, lost my slides. And you ask, what is a woman? They say a woman is anyone who identifies as a woman. And that's no answer at all. It's circular reasoning. And it never sat right with me. And then in college, I noticed how my friends who identified as quote unquote trans and underwent medical procedures didn't end up doing any better. Many of them actually got worse and became very unstable. So that got the gears turning in the back of my head that something wasn't quite right. In my senior year of college, I read a lot of turf blogs and forums and things like that. And I hope I'm allowed to swear. I remember thinking, holy shit, I've gotten this all wrong. These women get it. What these women are saying makes sense to me. They're not bigots after all. They're actually very sensible. And I'll talk about my peak trans moment toward the end. But yeah, that's how I got here. And since 2019, I've just become more and more involved, and it's really been a joy to return to real feminism, and I do consider TERFs to be the modern day version of the suffragists and the suffragettes that I admired as a little girl. So now I have my remarks about the caucus, so I just want to open with a quote by Adrienne Rich. She says, "There must be those among us with whom we can sit down and weep and still be counted as warriors. I make up this strange, angry packet for you, threaded with love. I think you thought there was no such place for you, and perhaps there was none then, and perhaps there is none now. But we will have to make it, we who want an end to suffering, who want to change the laws of history, if we are not to give ourselves away." So the mission of the WDI USA Desisted and Detransitioned Women's Caucus, launched in 2024, is to advocate for women and girls who previously believed they had a so-called gender identity by sharing our stories and learning from the women who came before us. So between 2009 and 2018, there's a 4,000% increase in the number of children and young people claiming to be the opposite sex in the UK, with many of those individuals undergoing experimental cross-sex hormone therapy and body-altering surgeries. Those subjected to this medicalization may face permanent infertility, among other lifelong irreversible health complications. Many of the older feminists we talked to expressed that had they been born in this era, they would very likely have been pushed to attempt to change their sex in response to their nonconformity with sex-based stereotypes. They want to help us because they see themselves in us. This cross-generational solidarity has had a profound impact on our development as radical feminists. The ideology of quote-unquote gender identity, in addition to annihilating the sex-based rights of women and girls, alienates women and girls from one another by encouraging them to interpret their experiences through the lens of an ever-expanding list of made-up identities rather than through the lens of women as a sex class. The damage this has done to the women's liberation movement is huge, but some of us are pushing back. Through writing and videos, we will share our stories and increase our understanding of them through a radical feminist lens. It is our hope that by amplifying the voices of those who deprogrammed from gender identity, we will contribute to the dismantling of this ideology. You may be wondering about the significance of the lizard and our logo, seen a few slides ago, and you see it here in Chloe Cole's Twitter bio. So some species of lizards regrow their tails, and lizards have been adopted as a symbol of detransition because they symbolize growth and new life after loss. So just clarification of some terms. So first of all, these, just for what it's worth, detransitioners and desisters can be male or female, but the focus of this caucus is women. So a detransitioner is someone who once believed herself to have a so-called gender identity, but no longer holds that belief, and who underwent irreversible medical procedures in order to approximate the appearance of the opposite sex, or sometimes the appearance of being no sex at all or between the sexes. So for detransitioned women, specifically, these procedures include GnRH agonists, colloquially known as puberty blockers, exogenous testosterone, double mastectomies, hysterectomies, metoidioplasties, and phalloplasties. And then a desister is someone who once believed herself to have a so-called gender identity, but never underwent the medical procedures mentioned above. So I'm a desister. On the caucus, there's 3 of us, so we've got one detransitioned woman named Celine, and then 2 desisters, myself, and a woman named Fern. What has the caucus accomplished since launching last year? I do want to say this is all online, so I encourage you to read through it in more depth. So we've got the Desisted and Detransitioned Women's Bill of Rights. So the purpose of this document is to describe the rights, reality, and political potential of desisted and detransitioned women, consistent with radical feminist principles. Okay. So we drew inspiration from the WDI USA Lesbian Caucus's Lesbian Bill of Rights, and there's just some screenshots here, so encourage you to read that in full. More screenshots. So a lot of what we do is related to the media. I don't know if you probably can't read that very well. It's kind of small. But we wrote a letter in response to the Times article about detransitioners, and it was published, and that was the first time WDI USA had been published in the pages of the New York Times. So that was cool to remind people of the leftist radical feminist critique of gender identity ideology. Last summer, the Arizona State Legislature passed SB 1511, so it's the Detransitioner Bill of Rights. And we got this article in a local paper and tried to encourage the Democrat governor, Katie Hobbs, to sign it into law. She didn't. She vetoed the bill with the explanation, quote, "This bill is unnecessary and would create a privacy risk for patients." On the WDI USA website, we've published personal testimony in either written or video format. So Celine wrote, I think, a beautiful essay about detransitioning. She was exposed to the concept through the testimony of Jamie Reed. She read an article about her in the paper. So Jamie Reed blew the whistle on medical experimentation conducted upon children in the name of quote-unquote gender medicine at the Washington University Transgender Center at the St. Louis Children's Hospital in Missouri. And Celine's essay was republished on Colin Wright's Substack, Reality's Last Stand, and Jamie Reed has read it. So here's a brief excerpt, a few paragraphs from her essay. So she writes, "I got a large tattoo to mask my breasts, thinking I'd never be able to afford a mastectomy. At the tattoo artist asked me, 'How do you sign? My body is amazing.' I showed her and she turned it into a dance of another woman life to love her body. I had begun to love mine, but was not loving either sex. I found out that my student health insurance covered quote-unquote transition, so I made a consultation for a simple release metoidioplasty, which is a genital surgery, because I wanted ambiguous genitalia. At the appointment, I had no sign language interpreter and did my best to understand the staff and communicate what I wanted. The surgeon asked if I wouldn't prefer a more linear path involving a mastectomy first. The nurse shook her own breasts at me while looking at my chest, eagerly smiling to indicate that the doctor was right. Uncomfortable, I took off my shirt. The surgeon assured me that my tattoo would remain totally intact, and that because I was so small-chested, the mastectomy could be done with the keyhole method, leaving me without scarring. The day of the surgery, I kept wondering if something would go wrong, if my insurance would suddenly fall through, if my ride home would cancel, thus necessitating me reschedule the whole thing. Instead, everything went very smoothly. Everyone assured me that when I woke up, I would be happy. A few days later in my dorm room, seeing my new chest unbandaged for the first time, I could hardly remember having breasts. I thought this meant it was the right thing to do, but in hindsight, it was trauma. I was 21 and had no idea that my breasts would not grow back if I stopped testosterone. And that's the end of the excerpt from her. But I encourage you to read the whole thing. It's amazing. So we've published several video interviews, and these are available on the WDI USA YouTube channel. So one features a young desisted woman named Maya. She spoke about learning to accept herself as a lesbian and finding community with other desisted and detransitioned women. Also have the other features a young detrans woman named Claire. So she underwent a double mastectomy at 15 years old and detransitioned before she finished high school. And something she said in that interview that really stuck with me was that it seems as if someone is mass producing detrans and desisted women in a factory because their stories are all so similar. Yeah. And she's not the youngest. So recently we encouraged the Republican governor of New Hampshire, Kelly Ayotte, to sign HB 377 and HB 712 into law. So 377 would ban puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones from being administered to minors, and then 712 would ban elective double mastectomies for minors. And I don't fully understand their whole system in New Hampshire and their timeline for bills, so we're still waiting to hear if those bills will become law. Let me see. Yeah, sure, we'll go ahead here. So WDI USA is prepping for our 4th national convention to be held this September 19th through the 21st in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I invite you all to join if you can come. It would be great to have overseas guests. So the Detrans Caucus did speak at last year's conference, but I'm going to talk about very briefly about this one. So one of the panels I'm hosting this year is titled Detransition, What's Next? It features 4 women talking about the healing process and really coming into their own politically post-medicalization. So one of the panelists is Claire from a few slides ago. So she writes, "Sometimes I think about how I'm going to live with this regret and shame for the rest of my life, and I struggle to find the motivation to keep going. Then I remember I'm not the only one, and if I don't stand up for girls like me, who will?" Another woman speaking on the panel is Prisha Mosley. So I just like this quote that she said, kind of almost off feminism to female teacher. So I think this is an exciting, hopeful time to be an advocate for desisted and detransitioned women. Last month, in the case United States versus Skermeti, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that states can ban medical procedures aimed at disguising the sex of minors. And at the moment, 27 states have laws banning such procedures, and we won't stop until these procedures are illegal nationwide. And thanks to the work of our state legislative advocacy team led by Lauren Levy, the WDI USA has provided testimony in support of many of these bills. Sorry, Lauren Levy, not Lauren Levy. And this is just a picture from the rally outside Skermeti last December. Many hospitals, even those in blue states without bans, have shuttered or halted their so-called gender medicine clinics in an effort to comply with the Trump administration's Executive Order 14187, protecting children from chemical and surgical mutilation. This includes Children's Hospital Los Angeles, which is home to the infamous Dr. Joanna Olson Kennedy, who said, you know, if you want to get breasts later, you can just go and get them. As well as Kaiser Permanente, which performed double mastectomies on Layla Jane and Chloe Cole at only 13 and 15 years old, respectively. And these two young women currently have lawsuits against Kaiser. On July 9th, the Federal Trade Commission pledged to investigate so-called gender-affirming care as a deceptive trade practice. They're expected to issue a public request for information shortly, and we plan to submit our testimony grounded in radical feminist analysis. That same day, the Department of Justice issued subpoenas to more than 20 doctors and clinics involved in performing sex trait modification procedures on minors. But the fight isn't over yet, and we can't become complacent, so EOs are not laws, and the next administration could come in and reverse course. So that's why it's so important to get these laws passed in the states. That's why so much writing on the court cases, because they can set a legal precedent. And then lawsuits too. Hopefully they make insurance companies think twice about covering such procedures. But above all, what we need most is deeper, lasting cultural change so that girls and women are not led down this path to begin with. We need to value women. We need, as a society, we need to stop seeing women as other or as non-man. And we need to connect the girls and young women coming of age today with powerful female role models who can help them to understand that focus should be on changing the structure of society, not changing your own sex body. So yesterday I was sitting in the back and two women, I think they are Paulina and Kristen, were talking about, older role models for young women. And yeah, that's really something that we're all about. So that's obviously a big project and not one that we're going to achieve in a day or even in a year, but don't let that discourage you. It feels like every day I find more and more women, especially young women, who are waking up. And there are so many more desisters and detransitioners than there were when I peaked trans in 2019, which is heartbreaking in its own way, but it does mean the young women are coming home. So sometimes women ask me what they can do to help, and I have to say that my number one answer is really quite simple. Just speak up and please don't ever stop. So maybe you think your efforts are small, maybe you think I'm just one woman, what difference can sometimes self, but you never know who could be listening. So I said I'd tell you what my peak trans movement was. So in the spring of 2019, I stumbled across a photo of a woman standing in front of a billboard thousands of miles away from me. And in that moment, everything clicked into place, and I realized that a woman is an adult human female, nothing more and nothing less. And that's all that's required to be a woman. It doesn't dictate how you dress, or what kind of job you have, or what interests you have, or who you love, or any of that. And then, it includes women who medicalize themselves in the name of gender identity. So the Desisted and Detransitioned Women's Bill of Rights states that, quote, "There is no point at which a detransitioned woman ceases to be a woman, regardless of the ways in which her body has been altered, because there is no wrong way to be a woman," end quote. So I don't know where I would be today if not for that billboard, which was posted by a woman that I'd never met who just kept speaking out. Because at that point I had been confused for almost a decade. And I really think I might have tried testosterone or surgery just to see if it would help. So yeah, one woman put 4 words on a billboard, and that changed the course of my life, and that keeps me going. I lost a lot of people with this cult. By the time I graduated college, I have to say like 90% of my friend group called themselves trans. And I have a lot of grief around everyone I've lost. But what keeps me going on the hard days is knowing that you can plant a seed in someone's mind, and you may not change her mind that day. There were things I saw here and there and little doubts that I had, but I guess I wasn't really ready for that until I hit about 22, which is about when your brain finishes developing. But yeah, you may not change her mind that day, but someday she'll be ready. So gatherings like this are bittersweet for me because as I'm seeing you all, I'm picturing the faces of the women I love who have lost their way, and I think of all that I've learned from you and all that they could learn from you. And I wish they were here too, but they aren't. They're not ready yet. They haven't woken up to the political potential of women, but I do believe they will someday. Lear Keith writes movingly of the women who, quote, "should be our next generation of warriors. The battlefield is instead their female flesh," end quote. What I would tell my friends and all women lost in gender identity ideology, or who are wondering if they can come home, is this: there are women on the other side waiting for you. I know this because I found them there waiting for me. Solidarity with other women helped me in a way. that neither psychiatric medication or therapy ever did. To put a spin on a phrase by Robin Morgan, sisterhood is still powerful. Thank you.